Okay, so I'm recording, and so the objective here is to do CRUD operations with C# entity framework with a code first approach, meaning you're creating the classes before you're creating the database. And so let's go ahead and start. I'll just start from an empty template, and I'm going to put this in my repository, sure, lab folder. We'll just call it chapter 20. So lab solution chapter 20, just for a place to put it. And I'll say this code first entity framework.
Do you think it's best that we just do our best to pay attention, or?
Yep, if I'm in your seats, I'm just watching right now. Because this is recorded on YouTube, you could follow along later. And your implementation of whatever you're creating is obviously going to be different than mine. And so we're going to create a simple, small example to start with, which is going to be students and grades. So our classes are going to be a grade class, and then we'll have a student class that will have a grade. So student will have a singular grade, and I am kind of following some basic tutorial guide here, but again, I think I'll follow along and demo it, and it's not full CRUD, so we're going to have a lot of figuring out to do. So let's start by creating a grade class, and something you're all very familiar with. And so here's our grade class, and let's go ahead and add a student class as well. And let's change these to public. One thing for the database is that we're going to wind up with the primary key columns, and so from what I remember about entity framework is that there are a lot of assumptions that are made, and one of those assumptions is that both students will have a student ID, which will be a primary key column, and grades will have a grade ID, which will be a primary key column. And so one of the assumptions is that your classes have an ID, and those IDs will become a primary key. So we'll start off by putting a property for grade ID, which is get and set, and kind of the same deal with student. Some other properties for our students, and really that's all we're going to populate our classes with are a bunch of properties. So prop tab is my favorite hotkey. String tab student name. Enter. So student has a student name. Prop tab date time tab date of birth. Do you remember what it means to put the question mark here? This goes back to the earlier chapters. It means that date time will be nullable in our database. It means you could leave it empty. If you don't have a date of birth, that is a nullable field. Prop tab an array of bytes for photos. A lot of times in databases, videos and photos are just stored in binary, ones and zeros. And so when you're looking at a byte data type, just storing binary bits in a byte, ones and zeros, is an efficient way to store things such as photos. Prop tab decimal tab height, so a student has a height. So okay, what do we got? We got an ID, a name, date of birth, we got a photo, a height. prop tab, float, tab, weight, height and weight. And a student has a grade. So public grade called grade, get and set. So pretty basic student class, really no methods involved here, just data. So student has a singular grade. Let's go grade ID. Prop tab, string, tab. Grade name is going to be your A, B, C, and so forth. Grade ID is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. Grade name would be your actual letter. A plus. The reason it's a string is it could have pluses and minuses. You have a section. Prop string section for the grade AWD 1100 is our section of this course. And a grade will have a collection. So we've dealt with collections. I don't know that we've dealt with an I collection called students. So the idea is that one grade could have many students. So like an A could have, 10 students with an A. So it's a one-to-many relationship. A student has a singular grade, but a grade could have many students. There is a new class, and so when you're doing this code first, that is needed here. In an entity framework, they call it a context class. And so this is a new class. We have not created a context class before. And so we're going to call this the school context.cs. And this context class has to inherit DB context. Now, in order to do this, DB context, we're going to need to import show potential fixes, and we're going to need to import this context using system. I got to find the right. So there's a right using statement that I need to import here. It's not picking it up for me. The entity framework. Let me find the namespace that we need to add up here. So I believe by adding this, just looked it up real quick. System data entity. And of course, that's not working, so we got to figure out probably what we need to do is add a reference for the entity framework. So let's figure that out. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look for it under references. So I'm going to right-click, add a reference. And if I search for entity, system data entity is something that we can check here. Click OK. Okay, so now that's recognized. Okay, there it is. Install package. And maybe this was there before. Maybe I just missed this. Install package entity framework. And so that's what we need to do. We need to install entity framework. I might have just overlooked that briefly. So let's go ahead and click. I don't want the core. I'm just going to do entity framework here. And let us do its thing. Now we got some recognized types. And we are cooking. Okay. So what does this school context look like? Again, we inherit from DB context. There's going to be two things here, which is a DB set of student called students, get and set, public DB set of grade called grades, get and set. And that's all that's needed to spin this up, a basic example. So like at a bare minimum, this is going to at least get the job started. So let's go ahead and put a button click here. And I did not mean to click this. There we go. Text will be create student, and the button create. Okay, so now we're in a form. We got a button click, and we'll say there's a using statement. And this will just say basically we're going to create an instance of a new school context. And so this using statement is interesting because I don't think we've highlighted this too much. But basically what this using statement does is say, okay, let's create this class, school context, and its scope, the scope of this class when it's in memory is basically from line 23 till 25. And so this object that we're creating right here, you're basically manipulating its scope to say, okay, as long as we're in this using statement, this variable CTX is in scope, but as soon as that ends, line 25 ends, it's out of scope, which means what? Which means it could be garbage collected and taken out of memory. Okay, so this using statement is just basically a way to say, okay, this variable is only important for this amount of time, a short amount of time. And so let's go and create a student. Student stu is new student. And let's use some auto-implemented properties here. Student name. Now, student ID should be automatic for us, so let's just give a student name of, put my name, and we can put in, I'm not going to put in a date of birth. Cool. Give myself a grade of an A. grade name is an A. Okay, so I'm not going to fill in all the properties, but I create a student. That student has a grade, and inside of my using statement, I'll say ctx dot students dot add stu, and then you do a ctx dot save changes. Okay. Let's run it and see what breaks. Pretty simple example. I should give a label or something to let you know that it works. Now it's interesting because I click it and you're going to notice it's not responding. And so what it's doing the first time, it actually does quite a bit of work creating database, creating a table, inserting a row into that table. So it's doing a fair amount of work. So you want to give it the time, the first time you create this, to do that work. And so I should have gave a label output that it was done correctly. Now if I go back to, let's go to my Object Explorer. And I'm going to have to dig around for this database and where it was created. Okay, there I can see my school context database. And there I could see my grades table, and I could see my students table. And if I view data in students, we can see a foreign key of grade ID of 1. What is the grade ID of 1? Let's go into the grades table and view data. Oh wait. The grade ID of 1 is an A. So it created a relational database, yeah. We've got two tables, the grades table and the student table. The student has a ID that was auto-implemented, right? I didn't give myself a student ID. I gave myself a name and a height. Why was my height 12? I don't know. And a grade of 1. Okay, so that's a base example of doing entity framework code first, but there's a lot more work to do. We got a question. Yeah, what's up?
Can you explain what you did, like CTX dot save changes? What is CTX?
The question is, we did this variable called CTX. What is CTX? CTX is an object of type school context. So school context was a class that we created that basically links us into our database. And so when we created this object of type school context, it's just the identifier for that object. And so I know that, specifically, like, we've never seen a class look like this before. And really what we need to do now is continue learning what else can we do with this, because I just created a student. Like if I run this again, I guess I'm 12 feet tall. Let's add in John Thor. How about that? Height is, for whatever reason, 13, and this is an A+. So let's just see how this works. So we click the create button, open up the school context. I think of that as opening the connection to the database. Generate a student. add the student, save the changes to the database. Again, this using block just basically says this school context goes out of scope here, and then there's the end of your button click. Let's see how this works. Oh, you know what? Before I click the button, let's add a label. And see how fast this one fires up now that it already created the database once. I click. Okay, a little bit faster this time. Still is doing a little bit of work on the back end for us. Let's close our tables and reopen them. So let's just kind of go back in here, refresh. View, let's start with students. By the way, interesting. Okay, we got plural table names. So the convention is to have a table with plural here. Okay, we have our 2 students. This grade ID is a grade ID of 2. Again, a one-to-many relationship. And so let's go into our other grades table, view data. We now have a grade and grade ID of 2. So the grade ID of 2 is the A+, which is what John has. Yes?
So what if you go in and you do what you just did, like adding another student,
Yep.
but you give them the grade of A?
We're going to do that next. So now the question is, okay, we're going to have Billy Madison with the height of 10, and we should see that this grade name of A should be an ID of 1, right? That's kind of my expectation, because A is the grade ID of 1, so student added. So let's go back into our Object Explorer, show our students, view data. Oh, well, my expectation was incorrect. It wasn't savvy enough to see that there already was an A. Let's go back into grades table.
Would you have to join those tables now?
Yeah, you would have to join it to pull it out and to see what. This is a little surprising to me. I'm kind of that surprised me that it created a new. Now, maybe here because I'm saying new grade. Maybe this is what's happening, is it's saying every time create a new grade, which is a new record. Probably if we created a grade like such, let's do this. Check this out. I know how to fix this. Grade. Student grade is new grade, and we'll do grade name is a B grade. Okay, you with me? The B grade is this. Now let's say grade equals B grade. All right. Stu that way we're not basically generating a new grade. So we got to have some new Sarah. I feel like that's a name. Who is she?
Sarah.
She's a comedian? Okay, who's another comedian?
Paul.
Huh?
Lucas Paul. I don't know.
There we go. Height of 8. Grade of B grade. Now I think these two students should have the same grade ID. So let's add stu ctx students dot add stu2, save change in, we'll say students added. So let's run it. Let's do our insert, students added. Now let's take a look at the data, close, close, view data. There we go, see that? Now they get the same, because it's literally the same object. Because before they were different objects, therefore they were generating new. So, you know, probably, how do you fix that? Select, what you'd have to do is you'd have to read out of the database the grade object into a variable called grade, and then assign that to your new students. You with me? So in order to not generate a new object for the grade every time, you would read the grade out of the database with a grade ID of 1, which is your A, store that in a grade object, and then assign that so you're not adding a new A 30 times. Yep.
So it was even though it was the same grade, it was still raising the grade ID.
It was.
every time? Okay.
That's right. So that was the problem. The problem, as demonstrated, was that every time we said new grade on our grade, it was generating a new row in our table, even though the grade, the string was an A, it didn't care. It didn't care that the grade name was an A or a B or what have you. We just had to use the same grade object. And now these two students, Sarah Silverson and Lucas Paul, again, Sarah Silverson and Lucas Paul both have a grade ID of 4, and a grade ID of 4 is a B. So I guess the next thing to do in this demonstration is to do a read. Like, I think that's a good idea. We just did an insert. So now let's do a read. Let's read the grade table. Let's read the B grade out, store it in an object, and then create a new student and use that object. So this is kind of a good way the demonstration is going. Yeah.
So the way that I would like, if this were to be like, say like a hands-on test,
Yeah.
the way I would perceive grade is like an enumeration, just like we were doing databases.
Okay.
For like A, B, C, D.
Sure,
or
sure.
F.
Sure.
Would you be able to put an enumeration into a database like you did in class?
Would you be able to put an enumeration in? I don't know how that would all tie in. And so my answer, because I genuinely, I don't know. I don't know how that would work. I would imagine so, but
Wouldn't it? Because I mean, you have booleans in SQL as well. Couldn't you still do enumerations?
you could do Booleans. You could. I'm imagining so. I'm imagining so. But I don't know. So the next kind of thing to do is like, let's select some data out of the database and show it on the form, right? So we'll take okay, what we left off was just doing a read operation, and this is actually really quite easy from what I've done so far. I'm going to populate a list of grades called grades, new list of grade. And so maybe we just do this like so. And we're just going to read into this list from the database. And so in order to do this, maybe on a button click, and read grades, button read, and we're going to use the same school context. And so I think of this as my connection to the database. So in this var ctx, our connection to the database, school context, with grades, you're very familiar. You can add a single grade, or you can add a range of grade. And so if I'm looking at add range accepts any collection that implements an IEnumerable of grade. So actually this works out really well. We're going to add a range of basically, let's call the database ctx.grades. And so this is our grades table, and it says for every grade, basically for every row, I'll say, for every row, let's add each row to our grades list. So in the database, you got a bunch of rows. In C#, we have a list called grades. Let's just loop through our list. Did I miss this? Yeah, I am. I'm missing a curly. Let's just, for the sake of this, now we have a list of grades. Let's just print out for each var grade in grades. Let's print out the grade plus equals grade. Okay, so read the grades out of the database, put the grades into a label. I want to fix one thing, which was my mistake from before, which was I've got multiple A's, so I'm just going to delete this one. Now that's going to be a problem. Why is that going to be a problem? I can't delete this, probably because there's a student with grade ID of 3. So a lot of times, yeah, no rows were deleted. So then you think, okay, well, let me delete the student. View data. Here's our student with grade ID of 3, and you're gonna delete the student first. Okay, good. Now I can delete the grade ID of 3. And you can see that now that works. So now I've got an A, an A+, a B. I mean, for the sake of this, let's just clean this up. We'll do A+ first. Of course, you got a student with an A. So let's, I don't want to delete all my students. Okay, we got an A, an A+, a B+. It won't be in order. Our sections are left blank, so let's just do a C+, and a C, and a D, and an F. Okay, so there's our grades. So we're gonna spit those out into a label is the idea, if this works. And what did okay, B grade does not exist. And so I'm just gonna comment this out because we're, list of grades. We wanna populate this. So interestingly enough, grades is here. I want to populate my grades. Instead of populating my list on the button click, I'll populate my list maybe on the form load. So now when the form is loading, I populate my list. Yeah. So that now when I add a grade, instead of adding an individual grade object, let's add, what is a B? Or it doesn't matter, let's just say grades sub-0. I think that's an A. So if I were to click the create button again, it's going to put an A in for these two students. Okay, let me just rewind this a little bit for those of you following along. I'm reading out of the database right here. We're opening a connection to the school context. It's kind of like creating a connection to the database. We're taking our grades list and we're adding a range of ctx.grades. This is our grades table, and basically it says for every row, make a grade. And so I'm going to put in a breakpoint right here, And again, I haven't tested any of this, so I'm expecting it to crash. We're going to start debugging. And let's see if we just get an immediate crash. We don't. So to me, that says the read operation into my list is probable that that's working, so that's a good thing. Let's click on read grades, and I want to look at my list. My grades list has a count of 8, and then this looks like this is reading. So for each grade and grades, I'm going to hit continue, and okay, great. So that's not what I need. Why? Well, for each grade and grades, let's see if I have any grade name. How about that? Because clearly we need the grade name property to read from our grade. And then what do you do to clean that up? Well, you do throw a little here, throw in a little \n. So what's really cool about this, okay, now we're reading from our grades when this is loading up, and then this kind of gives us a list of grades that we can maybe put into a drop-down list and allow the user to type in a drop box for the student name, the height, and then we'll select a grade from the drop-down list. I'm kind of curious if I put a toString in here, what this is going to do. For our drop-down list, you know, I'm thinking we need a grade.toString to get the grade name out of it. But let's just start piecing this together. So reading grade is working as demonstrated here. I've already demonstrated creating a grade, creating a new student. But now I want to, there's a million things that we could do here, but all around CRUD operations. Let's just populate a drop-down list of grades. Instead of click the button and read the grades, let's just put a drop-down list. Toolbox, combo box, properties, name, CBO grades. And here, CBO grades dot items dot add range. I think this is going to do I didn't think grades dot. I didn't think so. So if I look at the items add range, let's just take a look at this. Okay, it takes an array of object, type object. So let's load. We already have our list. Let me see if I can add range. Just grades, because that's a list. It's not.
I think you just need to do the CTX .grades to array.
So let's try that. CTX.grades.toArray.
Or would it be grade to array? Because the data type is grade? Or is it because the list name is grades?
Well, the thing is it's not going to get the grade name. I think this is not going to get the grade name, so that's why we need the toString, is what I'm thinking. See that?
Yeah, toString should.
So we got to get our toString in here. So public override to string, and we're going to return grade name. Now I'm just going to do a build solution. Now, ooh, I don't know. I don't expect this to work. Oh gosh. I like surprising myself. I'm telling you, set the expectation. If you learn one thing in this class, I think the expectation for us is that we're going to write it one time and it's going to work. And over my years of doing this, I just changed my expectation. You lower the bar. If you say this is going to work the first time, don't expect that. We're not perfect. We don't write perfect code. The first time you write it, expect it to break. And then you go into it expecting to troubleshoot it. And then if it happens to work, you're like pleasantly surprised, right? So, okay, this is good. So now we can insert a student a little bit more dynamically. So when I create a student, let's read let's just undo this. Student name equals, and we'll just have a couple of controls. That was the hard one. Text box for the student name. Text student name. What else did I insert? I also inserted a height for whatever reason and a grade. So the height label. Student height. Text height. Text student name. And we'll just throw a little label on for the grade. Obviously, that's what this is. Okay. And whoop. Text. Okay, so the student name is now coming from the text student name dot text. The height is coming from now height on student is a decimal. So we'll do convert to decimal text height dot text. And the grade will be from the dropdown CBO grades dot selected item, and that'll return an object. And let's see what this says. The object that is currently selected item or null, there is no, if there is no, okay.
You gotta set up starting index, right? If you just put
Yeah.
item and nothing selected.
Yeah, so let's do, when the form loads, CBO grades dot selected index is 0. Let's do that after this. That doesn't seem to care. Cannot convert object to a grade. Okay, so that's really what's going on. Grade. There we go. We just had to convert the item into a grade. Okay, so now this is a little bit more dynamic. We're going to create something, and it should not insert a new grade should not insert a new grade. I believe because we're getting it from the list of grades, those already exist. That's my hope. We shall see. Did I put a, yeah. Okay, so Tom Thompson has a grade of 2. And if I show the data, darn.
What does it say?
It says grade ID of 10, which means another A has been added. I mean, it's really not the important part of this, but I just didn't want that to be the case. I thought maybe because we were reading our grades, let's instead of using it out of the combo box, we can still fix this. Let's just say grades sub 0. Okay, so now grades is our list. So I'm just going to hard code in grade sub 0. Grade sub 0 is our first grade, which is like an A. So now we're going to read another new student. I think I know how to fix this. Okay, so regardless of this combo box, this doesn't matter. So I'll say Billy Bill has a grade of C. So let's click input string with incorrect format. 1 second.
Oh, the height is Bill.
Yeah, you put the student height in.
Oh, good. Okay. Student height is 3. Again, it's going to hard code an A. Student added. Grade sub 0. So let's look here. Object Explorer. Students. View data. Same difference. Yeah, what's up?
When you did the hard coded to 0, would it work if you did like the selected thing for the index? Because like if you did C, it would do like 2 instead of like 0, something like that. Like that combo box, because you can do the selected item, then you can do the selected index. If you did the selected index, would that work?
You're referring to the selected index
So
in
that
the
they all-
grade?
Yeah.
So let me see that CBO grades dot selected
Oh,
in.
no, keep the grades thing, because
I'm not following what you're saying.
in the subscript, put the selected index.
In the subscript.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? The subscript.
Other-
No, I
with
have the
zero.
0.
Where the 0 is?
This subscript. Okay, thank you. Put what?
Combo box dot selected index.
Gotcha. So let's try that. I'm all for trying some different things.
I don't think that I did. Well, let's see.
You put a string in the
I keep doing that. I think. No. So
I think it's because you're always adding a grade. You're not like just accessing it, you know? Like if you just had a list that you were accessing and just like setting it to like, okay, A equals 1. I don't know.
And because it's technically like in a more real world scenario, you'd have a table with a list of student names, and then each student would have a separate table for themselves, which probably would decrease all the confusion.
I don't think it's too important to get caught up on this. I mean, this is still a working application. We just have to have a bunch of A's, and that's annoying. And it could be fixed, but I don't want to get caught up in this. I can circle back and troubleshoot this. You know, let's instead, we did a read. you know, we could say, give me a student name, and then, so let's, you know, we could do this is reading the grades here. Let's do a search. Let's do a search. So, instead of reading the grades, which we're already doing and populating that, let's search for student, and we'll just call this button search. Refactor this. But search for student. You could probably guess how this is going to work based on everything we've done in this class. Let's say list of student and then we'll do students.addRange ctx.students. So again, pulling it from there. Now we have a list of students, and for each var student in students, if student name dot equals text student name dot text, label result dot text equals, we'll say student dot toString, and let's throw in a little toString here in our and the toString will return student ID, student name, and I messed up my semicolon, curly braces one more time. There we go. Build solution, succeeded. And so we just have a little search. If we find the student, put their toString in the label. Bool found student is false. If you haven't found the student, label result dot text is student not found. What's up, Ryan?
Wouldn't that be true though? Because you're saying if not false.
Yeah, if you're right. So then I would set here found student is true. So if you still haven't, if found student is still false, then you say student not found. So what are our students' names? So we'll do a demo of a good student and a bad student. View data. Let's just use my name. And so we have a list of students coming from CTX students. We loop through them, search for them, debug, start without debugging.
You didn't put a control in for the search.
I just renamed one, didn't I?
To read from a text box?
Oh, I didn't. I didn't read from the text box. So let's, oh, there it is. Here, I just read from the text box in this if statement.
But you didn't put the control in the form.
Text student name?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's here.
Oh, that. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just use that. So, oops, I clicked the wrong button. My controls are confusing myself. Search for student. Found the student. If I misspell my last name, this is awesome. As simple as I mean, this code's really not too complex. This code's really not too complex. And again, these CRUD operations on our database, how simple does this make it? What do we have to do? We have to do an update and a delete. So let's now that we've found a student, we need to update the student or delete the student. So probably, what student do you want to, once we search for a student, we can say student modify student, update student is null. And then, so once we search for a student, if we find it, we'll say modify student, update student, update student, update student equals student. So here we can use this update student. We can leave that alone for now. So we set the update student equal to the found student. So you got to search for a student first by search by their name. If you find it, then we have this update student, and we'll set the value. So now let's make a button for update. Button. btn update. Okay. If update student is not equal to null, meaning you've searched for a student and you found a student. If update student is not equal to null, now we'll say update student dot student name equals, okay, let's add another field so we're not, this is our search and it's our create student, but let's just add a little control to confuse ourselves even more, to update the student name with this text box here. Text update name, okay. What I know we need to do next is open a connection to our database. So just as we've done before, we're going to add a using statement. And what I need to do is figure out how to run this update. So let me do another Google. Okay, after a Google search, I think what I'm going to try is just calling the save changes. And so as I have many times, I need to add a curly. So I'm going to search for a student first to update. So we're going to search by the first name and load that student into this object called update student. And we say if the update student is not null, then let's update the data with the name. And then we're going to call save changes, and we're going to see how that works. And so if I search for my name, search for student, I find, so I'll put my middle name in there. And before I do this, I do want a label. Label result.text is updated. I believe that's how that worked yesterday when we were doing link. When we did an update, we just called save changes, if I'm remembering right. So if I search, found, boy, that would be easy. Boy, that would be easy. And
Maybe refreshing.
I'll give it a second. View data. Yeah, not.
You can't click that refresh button maybe, or
Let's.
already done it.
Is there a refresh here? Yeah, let's refresh.
No.
Okay. Now. Okay. When I read my students into a list, and then I created this new object, and then I updated the new object. I didn't update the students in the list. So maybe instead of updating this object here, I just update a student in a list. Or more directly, I have these students in a list that's looping through CTX students. I wonder if we could just directly access CTX students. And so I'm going to kind of refactor this a little bit. Int update student position equals -1. And here, update student position equals, I need to know what position. So I need this to be a regular for loop. For int I equal to 0, I less than students.count I plus plus. So I'm just refactoring this to use a regular for loop instead of a for each. And then update student position is I. So this is just going to get the position in the loop that the fella is in. So my position 0. So now if update student position is not equal to -1, we put this in here. And we could say CTX dot students sub search. What was my
Updates.
update? Thank you. Every time update student position. Cannot apply indexing with DB set. And so that's so that doesn't work.
Why would
Marketing, whenever you're
Well, what it didn't like is I thought maybe I could just use an index on this students table, but it didn't like that. It says cannot apply indexing with a DB set of student, and so one thing that I'm thinking here and using CTX, so I'm gonna take this out. Var student equals CTX dot students dot, and this is where you can get find so this is actually going to be a little bit more efficient than everything that we were doing. Find stu where the student dot student name dot equals text student name dot text CTX students dot so single or default. It's kind of doing the finding. Okay, so we're going to load our student CTX students single or default the student where the student name equals text student name dot text. We'll then do a student dot student name equals text update name dot text. This is okay. The logic that I was using where we had to click on the search for student first is now being replaced by this what's called a lambda expression. We're querying the student's records a little bit differently. We're saying search for a student where the student's name equals whatever is in that text box. And then update that student to be whatever the student name equal to the text update name. Then we save the changes. Then we do that. Then we don't need this. And now I have hope.
Remember, keep your expectations low.
Keep your expectations low. Gosh, follow my own rules. It's going to break. Okay, so Evan Gudmestead is the student. Evan Andreas Gudmestead is the update. My UI is terrible. The worst UI in the history.
I've seen worse.
I don't know, man.
Oh, you have to search for student first, I think. Or no, maybe not.
Well, no, I think I took that
Oh,
out.
yeah, you did.
Oh, wait a minute. Yes, we do. Why? Because look, we just take that out. We don't need this update student position -1 anymore.
Yeah.
Remember that? Let's take that out. We're not using you. Keep expectations low. All right. All right. Now this means like there's like a 50-50 chance. It says updated, but I'll take my 50-50 chance. Oh, don't get your hopes up. My hopes were up and they worked. Yeah. Okay, so that was just a different way. Like I wanted to write my own search logic. As it turns out, that was too far disconnected. Like the student object I was created was not a student out of the students table. Like I created the separate student object. The separate student object was not out of the students table. So it's like, okay, I understood when I tried the first way why it didn't work, and it was a different student at that point. So I had to figure out how to work with a student out of the student's table, and there's a method. Now this single or default was just the method I Googled, if you will, that allow us to write this lambda expression to search for a student where the student's name equals whatever's in the text box. Yeah.
Does that throw an exception if it doesn't equal, or is that what it's called, single or default? Or?
Well, I guess if you had multiple Evan Gudmesteds, yeah. So it would just return probably the first, is my assumption.
Well, could you try it with
So let's,
like,
yeah.
maybe just like a name that isn't on the list?
Yeah, so and there's your exception. So yeah. Line 82, line 82. Since that never found anything, student was not set to an instance of an object.
So you would put all that in like a try block, and then
Yeah, you could put it in a try block, or better yet, you would say if student not equal to null, then let's update them.
oh, okay, that's probably good.
Wasn't there a method, and you could actually just write your SQL query there? Couldn't you just-
Yeah, and I haven't tinkered with that, but there was a method. So to just write your own SQL statement. So that's cool.
Wouldn't that be a simpler way to update them? Make it the same?
Really interesting question. Couldn't you just write your own SQL statements? Like, we learned SQL all last week, and I have not written a single line of SQL in this lab. As it turns out, both Link and Entity Framework are kind of additional tools on top of this ADO.NET. There are some classes. There are some ways to do that. I need to just shorten it up. There are some ways to do that. And, I'm at a point where I wanted to show you a couple different ways of doing this. And because we need to get to the point where you guys are, writing some code here. And I know you guys want to do that. I was tinkering around with let me just use some classes that allow you to write some SQL code directly, because maybe you would like that method. So I did a method yesterday. I'm doing a method today. I was thinking about doing one more day of this just to show you your options, and then letting you go from there. And that third way was exactly that, just some classes that are built into ADO.NET, if you will, that allow you to directly write SQL. The recording's only at 1 hour and 15 minutes. Again, I think it's been a little choppy for you guys to watch, because who likes watching, troubleshooting? No one likes to watch someone else troubleshoot. Huh?
Part of coding.
Part of coding, yeah. Yeah, it is, for sure. But no, every time I'm like, okay, guys, watch, this is exactly how it works. I got full attention, and then as I go, oh, it broke. And then, 2/3 of you, I lose your attention. And it's not you, it's just what happens in coding class, because you just want to know the answer. You don't really care to watch me troubleshoot. Even though arguably the troubleshooting skills are more valuable than the coding skills. Last thing is to delete a student. Boy, this is going to be really similar, I bet. Let's do a delete student. when I was, exploring these methods that belong to CTX. So ctx.students.remove, and then remove a student entity. Now, the IntelliSense, again, we already know that we can't use an index here, but what we learned before, single or default, the student with where stu.student name, let's just do student, I don't know. No, let's make it off of control. Student name dot equals text student name dot text. Wouldn't that be easy to remove a student? CTX.save changes. And again, what happens if there is no student with this is going to throw an exception, right? So you put it in a try-catch block and handle the exceptions. But we know there's Evan Andreas Gudmested. Let's see what other students there are. CTX.save changes. Label result dot text is deleted. So it's going to be off of student name. We're going to click delete student. Let's find a student to delete. Who do we want to get rid of? Billy Bill is going away. So let's run it. And Billy Bill, delete student. It says deleted. And let's view the data now. Unbelievable.
It's all Billy Bill's fault.
It's all Billy Bill's fault. I will tell you, simple CRUD applications. It's like, hey, did the C# class, and I built this library to keep track of my books at home, and I wrote entity framework, code first, interacted with the database, and simple applications like this. Someone looks through your code. I've seen students get jobs showing simple apps like this. It's just like, here's what I did in school. It's like, that's actually kind of cool. You're hired. Like, that's what they needed to see. I'll give you a perfect example. Same exact thing. They wanted a student made an app that kept track of cars at a car show. That's all it was. Car to car show and what place they got and, what cars showed up and who were their owners and that kind of stuff. And he was able to demo that, and literally it was like on the spot, got a job. So, CRUD applications,
Kind of crazy. I guess to us, it seems like it's something simple, but that you show this to somebody. Think about how many little mom and pop shops could benefit from a management program.
Yeah.
something so simple. Yeah. Yep. How many places have paper records? They're keeping track of. I'll give you another example. Same exact thing. And maybe I've shared this one before because I like it. I had a student who worked at a graveyard, and I've never. Okay. So it turns out graveyards have a bunch of graves in them, and these graves, people are actually quite interested where their family members are buried, right? So there are people that call around graveyards and say, hey, I'm looking for my dead relative, and are they by chance buried in your graveyard? And the pen and paper system, now you got to think, someone died in 1920, just make up a year. They write down the record of their grave and they put it in a filing cabinet. It's been 100 years. Do you think that ink is very easy to read? Or do you think it's completely faded and useless? So their record keeping systems and for graveyards were terrible. So a student made a simple app like this to keep track of graves at a graveyard. They converted all of their records from pen and paper, everything that was legible. So now it's like, hey, I'm looking for my deceased relative. Their name is Billie Jean. Oh, let me go into my application and search up Billie Jean. Oh yeah, they're at plot number 5. Totally useful to the business. It increased the speed at which they could research records, and you show that off to a potential employer. It's like a real business, a real use case, simple application, functionality, database, search, update, delete, CRUD stuff. Really cool stuff. All right, I'm going to shut up, stop the recording.